Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Bring that volume down a little bit. I think my headphones are working okay. All right. Sounds like we're set up all right here. Hi, thanks for joining. So, a little bit of intro, background, admin type stuff before we kick off. First of all, hello and welcome. This is a live stream walking through the syllabus that a private pilot would go through, starting from no knowledge all the way through passing their pilot certification exam. And so we're essentially following the airman certification standards for the private pilot and through a series of lessons that build on each other and hopefully teach you then how to actually fly an airplane. One important thing to keep in mind though is this, although I am a real life CFI, and I am trying to present good and valuable content. The best way to learn, and really the only way to learn, is to go and fly in real life with an actual CFI where you can have that one-on-one kind of relationship. And the reason that's so important is a CFI in real life who's working with you on flying will identify any areas of shortcomings or areas where you're excelling and can kind of tailor their curriculum to fit your needs better. So my goal in this is to hopefully present some useful information. Even if you can't tune in for all the different lessons, I hope that in any given lesson you'll pick up a couple of things that are useful either in your sim flying or in your real world flying if you're already a pilot. But if you're interested in going out and actually getting your pilot's license, which I hope you are, my big suggestion would be to go to your local airport and find either a flight club or a flight school or just a CFI who works there and do a demo flight and just see if you enjoy actually flying the airplane. So again, I hope this is really useful content to you, but it is not meant to replace an actual flight instructor working with you on your license. The lessons do build on each other, but like I said, I've kind of designed this so that you can jump in anywhere and hopefully you'll pick up a couple of useful things. One other quick note on the videos themselves. They are expiring on the Twitch page pretty soon. And so, excuse me, I'm gonna go ready to fly here so we can sit at the airport. Actually, I'll put live weather so you can see what it looks like where I am now. I'm just a little ways away from where this airport is. So you can see, we'll let that pop in, see if it comes up. It should be pretty stormy and kind of gross. There we go. Yep, that's what it looks like where I am right now. All right, so yeah, lots of fun. Let's put this back to we'll go back to clear skies. Let that dry off the airport. So like I said, the videos on Twitch are expiring relatively soon. I will upload the recordings of the videos to YouTube for anyone who wants them to watch them after the fact. And I put in a new chat command called !YouTube. So if you type in that, that'll show you the link to my set of videos. Currently, none of these videos are up. I'm going to start uploading them later today. You can find some of the old live stream ones on there, so if you're curious about that, those are kind of fun national park tours. The other one I'll mention real quick is if you have any questions that come up after the video, or if you're watching this sometime in the future, you can go to the Thank You for Being My Co-Pilot Discord. It's a great place to just message with questions or feedback or anything else you'd like to throw out there. It's a great little community. I mentioned the Discord, YouTube. There's also add-ons. So if you type that in, these are the add-ons that I'm using that are probably the most impactful to the flight. I have a couple of other ones if you're curious. I can talk about what they are. But for the most part, these are the ones that I think if you're going to follow along, this would be a good set to get. Last but not least, there are a couple of bugs I'm still working through. If you watched the stream yesterday, you may have noticed some dropped frames or even that the end of the stream was just cut off. I did a bunch of debugging yesterday to try to figure out what was going on, and I made some modifications that I think will help, and so far I have 0 dropped frames, so that's encouraging. My best running theory is because there are so many storms in the Bay Area, it seems like some of the internet services are just being impacted. So where I'm supposed to be getting about 10 megabits per second upload speeds, yesterday I was getting about 2, which was causing a lot of odd issues in the stream. So I've configured some new things in OBS, and I'm hoping that it'll be a little bit smoother. One of the other changes I made is I switched everything to just my PC, so I'm not doing this sort of back and forth between computers. Hopefully that keeps the audio a little bit more stable as well. I don't know if that was actually bothering people or not. Hopefully not, but hopefully that'll help a little bit there. And certainly it reduces moving pieces. So again, I'm hoping that that will keep the stream a little more simple and then also more stable in that way. All right. So that's it for sort of intro admin stuff. One follow-up from last flight, I had mentioned that I wanted to look up the specific definition of a stall, and I will pull up real quick what that actually was. And you can also see how I'm going to do this set up just Windows. So here is the same lesson plans that we were seeing before. I don't have the iPad currently hooked up. Fortunately, we don't need it for this lesson, so not that big a deal, but good to know. So I went in and added a definition of a stall to my lesson plans. And this is specifically from the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. So this is the FAA definition. And they define it, I think, in a pretty good way, which is a rapid decrease in lift caused by separation of airflow from the wing's surface brought on by exceeding the critical angle of attack. We'll talk a lot about this today, but a stall can occur at any pitch or airspeed, pitch attitude or airspeed. So the reason I wanted to call this out is that a stall does not mean that you've totally lost all lift. It just means that you've exceeded the critical angle of attack and the amount of lift the wing is generating is going to drop off incredibly fast. And we'll see that today when we're practicing, but it looks like this full stall. So we'll keep, we'll have the stall horn going, we'll be in a stall, and we'll continue to push it further and further, and then eventually we'll hit a full stall and the airplane will just pitch forward on its own. We'll talk about why that is in just a moment. Okay, and that's all I have for background things. So why don't we dive into it? Just to remind us of where we are and where we're going. So this is the blocks of learning, kind of the different lesson plans and how they connect together. So we started with pre-flight, taxiing, post-flight, 4 fundamentals of flight, and slow flight. Today we're doing power off stalls, which will build on that slow flight. We already had one lesson on towered airport operations. At the time I called that ground operations, but I've kind of readjusted that lesson a little bit. If you were there for that, you might remember some of the reasons, but essentially it covered both too much and too little content. So I kind of changed that around a little bit. We won't do this one because we've already covered most of the topics on there, and anything we haven't we'll hit on later. So after power on, power off stalls, then we'll start getting into normal and crosswind takeoffs and climbs. And then on from there. You'll notice that we have a little bit 4 fundamentals of flight. We could have jumped right into ground maneuvers. I have this arrow along the side. I think it's cleaner to talk about power on, power off stalls, takeoffs, and climbs first before we get into ground reference maneuvers. But that's technically an option too. So just a different way of approaching it. Okay. Quick scan the chat. Good. Okay. Looks like we're doing all right. So let's dive into the actual lesson today. So the objective of this lesson is to develop knowledge, risk management, and skills associated with power on and power off stalls. These are both maneuvers. They're both things you'll have to demonstrate on your final exam with the FAA. And so they're super important from a actual flying safety perspective and also important from your final test date. Hopefully everything we talk about is important for both of those reasons. Okay, a couple of references that are useful. There's that same energy management chapter in the Airplane Flying Handbook. This is a really good one to read. Again, a little bit technical, but really nice framework for it if you kind of appreciate it in that way. Aerodynamics of flight, we talked a little bit about yesterday too. There's the Private Pilot ACS, and then, of course, the Pilot's Operating Handbook, which will talk a little bit more about stall procedures for this particular aircraft. Builds on maneuvering during slow flight, like we looked at. Schedule for today, we'll have 0.5 hours of ground, 1 hour of flight practice, and then we'll practice this on multiple flights. So if we were working together, if you were a student of mine, then we would be really using this as a chance to introduce what this looks like. And then it's one of those ones that we practice and drill, and we'll go out and maybe we'll do one or two stalls at the start of a lesson or that kind of thing. This is one of those skills that you really want to be automatic. So you should, you hear the stall horn and you immediately recover from the stall. What we're doing today is we're going to kind of aggravate the stall and see how the airplane behaves and how to recover from a full stall. But in reality, you want to be recovering. As soon as you hear that stall horn, you want to be recovering. And so the instinct needs to be push the yoke forward to break the stall and then start to recover. We'll talk about the whole procedure later. And I suppose later is sort of now. So let's jump into the lesson elements. Hey, Shoots, looking at this thing, do you plan, to put any of these links into resources in Discord? Yeah, I can. Shoots, you mean like the add-ons or resources like the PHAC and the AFH and stuff like that? Give Shoots a second to respond there. So we'll have sort of just the YouTube link, video link. Yep, I can do that. Great question. I'll make a note on my to-do list coming out. Yep, can totally do that. So I'll find a good place for them where it's sort of obvious. Maybe in one of the existing channels, maybe in just sort of like an archives almost channel, which would just be a read-only thing. But great suggestion. I can definitely do that. Be covering spin stalls. So I won't be covering spins today, actually. Let me pull up here. So later on, as we'll do power on, power off stalls, and then we're going to really get into flying the traffic pattern and kind of airport operations. We will talk a little bit about spin awareness and spin recovery before we go into forward slips to a landing. So we'll talk about this a little bit today, but if you're flying uncoordinated, so if the ball, if I can flip back to here, if the ball is not centered in the slip skid indicator, which means that you're uncoordinated flight, and then you stall. So if those two things happen, you can enter a spin. And a spin is recoverable. It's it's sort of a bit of a spectacle to see, but it's not. And so you kind of want to avoid it. But the biggest thing to know is how to avoid a spin and to see how one develops. And so we will talk about spins before we get into forward slips to a landing, because forward slips to a landing are uncoordinated flight. It's cross-controlled. So again, this is a couple lessons away from here, but yeah, so we'll do spin awareness and spin recovery just before forward slips to a landing. If I can in the sim, I will try to actually spin the 172. 172s are hard to spin, which is great. It's a very well-designed airplane. It's a great trainer plane. It's a great plane to learn in. But I'll play with it a little bit and see if we can actually get a spin going so we can talk about the proper recovery. Good question, thanks. All right, so let's dive into aerodynamics of stalls first. So actually we'll talk about kind of 6 main areas. We always finish with common errors, just things to be thinking about going out the door. First, we'll talk about the aerodynamics of stalls, talk about situations where the risk of stalls increase, how to recognize a stall. Talked a little bit about this during slow flight, but we'll really get into the details here. And then we'll go and do the power off and power on stall maneuvers. All right, first, aerodynamics of the stall. So a stall occurs, and this is, we talked about, right, is a rapid decrease in lift caused by the separation of airflow from the wing surface, brought on by exceeding the critical angle of attack. So if your wing exceeds the critical angle of attack, then you will have a significant loss of lift, and if you continue to aggravate it, eventually you'll lose almost all of your lift. And we'll talk about what the airplane does in that case. A stall can occur at any airspeed, attitude, or power setting. So this is related to what we talked about in maneuvering during slow flight, which is that the angle of attack is, let me do it this way. Oops. I can just go like this. So the angle of attack is based on the relative wind. So what that means is that, how do I put this? Actually, this is not a good example of what I mean here. So a stall can occur at any airspeed, attitude, or power setting. We'll talk about why that is, but essentially all you need for a stall to occur is to exceed the critical angle of attack. And there are a number of ways you can do that. And so one thing you might think of with a stall, especially because that's how we'll practice it, is if you pitch up too high, eventually you'll stall. And that's one fair way of thinking about it. And it's one type of way that a stall might occur. But there's a bunch of different ways that you could potentially create a stall if you're not paying attention to certain elements of how you've either loaded the airplane or how you're flying the airplane. And we'll talk about all of those here in this section. The important takeaway, though, is you can cause a stall at any airspeed, any attitude, or any power setting. So, we'll talk about awareness of what kinds of situations typically lead to stalls, but you don't need to be, So this is one of those big takeaways from the lesson is, stall can occur at any airspeed, attitude, or power setting. A couple of things that will change the stall when you stall or how you stall. So two different effects we'll talk about: changing the wing shape or changing the wing loading. So changing the wing shape, let's go on this plane. So if we lower the flaps, the wing generates more lift, and so we can fly at a lower angle of attack with the flaps, which gives us a lower stall speed. So essentially, let me flip over to the sim here. So if I go out here and do it this way. So if I go out here and lower my flaps, so right now we have this nice sort of curvature of the wing and a particular chord that goes right along from the front to the back. If we were to drop the flaps, all of a sudden we've changed the shape of that wing, and the new shape allows us to fly at lower airspeeds before we exceed the critical angle of attack. So lowering the flaps means that we reduce our stall speed. There's one other place where this is sort of shows up inside the actual aircraft. So in a cruise configuration, so in the 172 that would mean just flaps up, the bottom of the green arc is your stall speed in cruise configuration, so that would be with flaps up. In landing configuration, the bottom of the white arc is your stall speed. And so you may have noticed this actually when we were flying slow flight yesterday. So when we were in a clean configuration, when we had flaps up, our stall speed was about 50, about 50-ish, just at the bottom of the green arc. And when we went into full flaps and did slow flight, our stall speed was about 40. So right at the different arcs here. These are change a little bit based on other factors we'll talk about in 2 seconds. But these are rough guidelines of what you see on these indications. Okay, so that is, you change the wing shape. Let's go back to the other effects. So this one is, the next thing you do is you can change the wing loading. And this requires a little bit of a discussion about how an airplane is designed to fly. So I'm going to pull this up. We talked a little bit about this in earlier lessons, but this is a good moment to reiterate this a little bit. So the airplane has some center of lift, maybe this red item here, and that's generating a force, upward when it's flying level, so a force up off of the wing that counteracts the weight of the airplane. But the weight of the airplane is centered at the center of gravity, which is going to be ahead of the center of lift. The reason that we have the center of gravity ahead of the center of lift is that if we were to stall, so if this entire lift vector just went away, that would cause, or got significantly reduced, that would cause the airplane to pitch nose down. And so it'll automatically correct itself and start to to pitch nose down and then start to gain speed, and you could fly it again. So the airplanes are designed to have a pitch forward moment if they lose lift. So if they lose lift here, they're supposed to pitch forward, and then they'd gain airspeed and you continue flying. The other thing that's important to know, though, is there's the center of gravity pulling forward here, but there's actually, in order to counteract the fact that the center of lift and the center of gravity are not in the same location, there needs to be another smaller force at the tail that's also pushing down. So if you imagine, I wish I had a little, I'm wondering if I can do this actually with the airplane. I probably can. This is where I wish I had a camera I could hold up like a little model of it. What's the best way to do this? Okay, so I'm gonna go back to the sim, and I'm actually gonna teleport up into the sky and just engine not running, nothing going on with the plane, and I want to see what happens with the aircraft, specifically when there's no forward motion. And so what I've just said is that the okay, so I'm going to do this, pause break. Okay. So what I've just said is that there is a center of lift kind of here, and a center of gravity a little bit in front of it here. And in order to keep the plane flying level, because these two are at a distance to each other, we need some force from the tail down. Oh, interesting. And it started the engine. Okay. Kill that. Okay, there we go. So there's the engine going away. Now I know that there's something I can show actually in here, and I'll pull that up in hopes that that shows a little bit. So they have a actual a pitch model here that kind of gets overlaid, and you can see their like approximation of this airplane. So we have this green lift vector, we have a red center of gravity, and then we have a small downforce from the tail. So this is supposed to be the front of the wing, the back of the wing, and there's the vertical stabilizer. So let's bring power back in here. Let's see if I can get this airplane restarted. Oh, that's probably why. That's okay. Okay, so if I then do this pause break, okay, there you go. So you can see how the center of gravity, which is ahead of the center lift and much heavier, because I have no power on the... I'm not flying fast enough to generate lift, and so when I'm not flying fast enough to generate lift, then there was that pitching forward moment. The plane just kind of fell forward. Now that the sim is registering that I'm pitched down a bunch, I'm actually gaining a bunch of airspeed, and now I have a ton of lift. Enough that I might break up this airplane, actually. So let's go back to level flight. And so in level flight, then we have the center of gravity here is being offset by a lift. Just make sure I'm actually flying level. Sorry, trying to do this from the side is a little weird. But you can see that there's an amount of lift being generated. There's a center of gravity pulling down, but there's actually more lift than gravity down, because in order to keep the airplane from tipping forward, right, if I brought out all engine power, I lose that lift and the airplane pitches forward. So in order to stay level, I actually need another downforce from the elevator. And when I have that additional downforce here, that then keeps the airplane flying straight and level horizontally here. Okay, so the reason this is important, let's pause this again. And we'll let the aircraft, so I'm going to bring it up to 2,000. We'll see if we can get this aircraft to kind of stabilize a bit. So let's flip back over here. So the reason that this becomes important is that because you need a downforce on the horizontal stabilizer on the elevator back here, because you need that downforce in order to keep the plane flying level, it means that you actually have not only the weight of the airplane, but also an additional weight, a sort of weight that's being created by the design of the airplane. So there's the actual weight of the airplane, but then there's an additional downforce here. And so the lift of the aircraft actually needs to be not only enough to lift the airplane, but enough to also counteract the downforce from the elevator. So let's look at one other thing here. I'm flying really. Let me quickly level out here and get back to, okay, there we go. This should work. So, okay, this is okay. So let me switch back to the sim. So what I've told you is that there's a certain amount of lift being created here. And then there's actually, but then to keep the plane, to account for the fact that there's a difference between the center of gravity and the center of lift, I've said that there's another downforce on the tail. And so if that's correct, if we look at the forces, we should see a lift from this wing, but then we should actually see essentially a backwards lift here. We should see a lift vector that's going down. And so let's look and see if that's what we see. Okay, good. So sure enough, so we have our lift vector up from the wing here. Kind of obnoxious to have both of these on. So we have a lift up from the wing, that's most of our lift, and then we have this downward force of lift back here that's actually keeping us flying level. One other thing that I'll point out about this is if you actually look at the, can I move this? Let's go to drone mode real quick. Okay. So if we look at this aircraft, so the wing we talked about earlier has this sort of nice shape where the top of it is a little bit curved, and that curvature is what creates lift. Oops, I'm just really flying past it. There we go. So there's that curve that goes over the top, and that curvature is then what causes it to generate lift. To get the lift that goes down here, they actually took the same basic principle, but they curve it the other direction. So if you look at this, you can see that the horizontal stabilizer is actually curved just like the wing, but flipped the other way around. So they basically took the same design as the wing, turned it upside down, and so that then allows it to generate lift down, which keeps the airplane flying. But for both the main wing and for the tail to be effective, you need airflow over it. And so when we start to talk about slow flight, or when we talk about stalls, because we're flying so slow, we don't have that airflow. Without the airflow, we don't have the lift. And so the plane starts to want to pitch down. So let me do it like this. Because the center of gravity and the center of lift are not in the same location. So, all right, let's go back to the view we had with the pitch here. Okay. So, flipping back then to our lesson plan a little bit, that means that if we change anything that changes the center of gravity, either the amount of gravity acting on it, so the weight of the airplane, or if we change the location of the center of gravity, or if we change the amount of lift being generated by the wing, which would also be the bank angle. So remember, if we want to hold a level bank, we also need to pull back on the elevator, which then loads the wings up. It puts more lift force on there. Or if we add or remove landing gear. So in this case, if we have landing gear here, that also then sort of breaks the airstream below. And so we have this force that's going to try and pitch the nose forward. If we have a force that's trying to pitch the nose forward, that means we need a stronger, we need additional force on the back than pulling the nose back up. So this vector is going to be bigger. If this vector needs to be bigger, that means our lift vector needs to be bigger, which means we have additional wing loading. And as soon as there's more wing loading, as soon as there's more pressure on the wing, that means that we're closer to stalling. And so our stall speed then increases. It just means that we could stall at a higher airspeed than otherwise normally. So let me show you something sort of interesting. If you were to take your weight, and we'll talk about this more when we do weight and balance, but I've said that the downward force here is to counteract the difference in location between the center of weight and the center of lift, right? And so if I move this center of weight back to be exactly where the center of lift is, then I shouldn't need any force in the back here pushing down because the lift and the center of gravity are both in the exact same place on the aircraft. So let's just increase the weight of the payload a little bit. There we go. And sure enough, You can see as soon as we get, so there's a little bit of a back force because of probably just some artifact of how I'm positioning the plane. But you can see when these two are equal, they're basically the same size of force. Oops, forgot to flip over. Sorry about that. So you can see when these two are equal. Let me go back. So before we were looking at it and it was like this, right? And so we have some distance between the center of lift and the center of gravity, and so we need this downforce on the tail in order to keep the plane flying level. If I were to add weight, essentially putting weight in the back cabin until these two are equal, then you see that these two forces are almost balanced, and our tail force is basically nothing. And I don't know why there's a little bit left here. I think it might just be an artifact of where I'm positioned. But again, so if I have these really far separate, we need a pretty strong tail force, which also means we need a stronger lift vector. But if I have them really close, then less. So this is changing how the weight is loaded, changing how much weight there is, both then impact the amount of lift that we need to generate, which then changes our stall speed. Yeah. So, okay. I think I've sufficiently belabored that point. Let me see if there's anything else I want to talk about. We'll flip back to the lesson. I'll jump back if I need to. CG is center of gravity. I'm sure I mentioned that. Another thing to mention is that our aircraft stalls from the inside back section of the wing, which means the ailerons will be less inside trailing edge of the wing. What's the correct way to describe that? Trailing edge. All right, I will look that up for tomorrow's. I can't remember what the best way to describe this, but I'll show you a picture of it, and hopefully that's worth 1,000 words anyway. So if we look at the stall progression in a regular wing, which is what we have, so this sort of square one, you see that it starts on the inside corner here and then starts to spread outwards. The reason that that's important is that if you do enter a stall, you lose effectiveness on the inside of the airplane first. I'm going to flip back to the sim so we can see why this would matter. So if I go, just got a little bit of sun in my eye there. Okay, here we go. So if we're losing effectiveness, or if we're stalling first from the inside root here at the very back, and then it spreads out in this direction, that means that we're going to have a little bit of lift available still at the ailerons, which means that we can still use the ailerons with a little bit of effectiveness. But it's important to know that your ailerons will be significantly less effective, and you really shouldn't count on them for recovering from the stall. Instead, what we're going to talk about is using the rudder in the back here. This rudder will continue to have airflow over it, and it'll be much more effective at actually correcting the stall, which is also, well, you'll see sort of as we want to stay coordinated, and so we're using our rudder to stay coordinated, and because it's so much more effective, we actually can stay coordinated through the entire stall. So although ailerons will lose effectiveness, the rudder will still work, as well as the elevator will still have some effectiveness too. All right, let's jump back here. So the last one on here, we talked a little bit about, oops, this should be a regular wing. Talked a little bit about this already, but the aircraft is designed to pitch down at stall. So when you lose your lift and then you lose your downforce from the tail, that means that there's a pitching forward moment from the center of gravity being in front of the center of lift, and so the aircraft will naturally want to pitch down. And we saw that already once in the sim. When we actually do some practice stalls, you'll see what that looks like in practice. All right, let's jump into the next section here then. So situations where risk of stalls increase. So these are ones to just have in the back of your mind as sort of when you're in this situation, you want to be cautious of the potential for a stall. One of them is landing approach, especially skidding base to final turn. We'll talk a lot about this when we do more traffic pattern things. But remember, we need to stay coordinated when we're flying. And so if you're turning and you're trying to, right, so you can see my ball is not coordinated, so centering it with the rudder. Good, so I'm turning to the left and coordinated flight. If you're flying along, I'll tell you what, I'm gonna actually flip back here. show this? Uh, yes, we'll do that real quick. So we're flying along here, and let's say that our runway was off to the left, just over there, and if I started to turn to the left to try to go towards the runway, and then oops, I'm not coordinated, so let's make sure I stay coordinated here. Good, there we go. So let's say I'm turning to the left to try to go to the runway, and then I go, oh no, the runway is too far to my left still. I'm going to use the rudder and just force my nose over to try and turn myself faster through. It doesn't actually turn the plane faster, and now I'm uncoordinated. You notice how far to the right the ball is? If I were to stall then, which I'm going really slow coming into the airport, so that's a possible place to stall. If I were to stall, then I would have a stall at low altitude, uncoordinated, and potentially could be really, really dangerous. So it is incredibly hard to recover from a stall when you're at that low in altitude. So especially when we're going around the traffic pattern, we want to make sure we're always flying coordinated, always maintaining appropriate airspeeds. We'll talk more about that later. But if you're finding that you're trying to jam the nose over by using the rudders, that's a really dangerous thing to do. Always want to stay coordinated flight. Another one that can be potentially hazardous is, let's say you're taking off, you got trees in front of you like we do here, and you say, oh, I got to pull up to avoid those trees. And so you're pulling up as hard as you can, you're pulling up, and all of a sudden you're past the point of stall and the airplane's going to stall. So there's my stall there. And then, of course, there's not much you can do there. I don't really want to show an actual crash on the thing, but that is the risk. So you can't climb out at a rate faster than the fastest climb out, the best climb speed. So we'll talk more about that later, but when we talk about hitting particular airspeeds, the manufacturer has figured out what the optimal airspeed is for you to be flying to get the best rate of climb. And so that's what you want to use when you're climbing out of an area. You don't want to be pulling back just to pull back, or pulling back thinking that you can just squeeze a little bit more performance out. It doesn't work like that. You'll end up losing performance, and also you may stall at low altitudes. Sorry, that was a little bit traumatic. Well, anyway, it's sort of good to see. Maybe the nice thing about the sim is you can actually experience some of those things from the safety of your home, but it is traumatic. I mean, it's really dangerous to have a low altitude stall. A couple other places you might have an increased risk of stall: emergency landing, power off glides, trying to stretch your glides. So if you're coming into land and you're just short of the runway, you want to. We'll talk about best glide when we talk about emergencies, but there's a specific airspeed that'll give you the longest possible glide, the longest, the most distance per altitude lost. Anything other than that best glide speed will be a shorter glide, even if it feels like it might be longer. It isn't, because the way that, if you remember, we looked yesterday at the minimum drag speed. So that minimum drag speed is the best possible glide, because you are losing the least amount of energy to drag artifacts. And so there's an inclination sometimes as you're trying to get close, like, oh, well, I need to stretch this glide, so I'm going to pull up the nose a little bit and just try to make the glide last longer. Well, as soon as you pull up from the glide, or if you try to pull up, all of a sudden you're adding a bunch of induced drag. You're flying at the low air speeds, and then you're going to fall really, really fast. So where it seems like you might be able to just, like, eke out a little bit more performance, in reality, what you're doing is you're causing more drag, and you'll actually drop faster than if you had just kept the best glide. And then, of course, if you pull up and you keep trying to stretch the glide like that, eventually you may stall because you'll run out of airspeed. I don't necessarily need to demonstrate that one, but when we do the glides, you can kind of get a sense for what that looks like. Exceeding max gross, or if the CG is out of limits. So we'll talk about this more with weight and balance, but when we were looking at the aircraft and I showed you that I can, like, put more weight in the back of the plane and move the CG. If you move the CG back from the center of lift, then the airplane, if it loses lift, tends to pitch backwards, and so you may actually aggravate the stall more because it won't naturally pitch forward. Let me look at this, actually. Let's just do, so there's only a certain amount of, there's two things on here: exceeding max gross. This should say max. Let me make sure. I don't know why that seems wrong to me. I don't. Oops, and I don't know why. So there's two things I want to talk about. One is exceeding max gross. The other is if the CG is out of limits. So I'll flip back to the flight sim. We can look at both of those cases. So again, if we're flying along like this, I'll add a little bit more speed, increase our airspeed some. So we'll go back in and look at the pitch. So the way that I'm loaded now, I actually have quite a bit of payload in the back. So we're facing the same way as this pitch thing. So you can kind of see when I have weight up in the front, maybe I'll add some more fuel in. I can make it so my pilot is maybe 170 pounds in the front. Maybe I'll put a 170-pound co-pilot. Okay, there you go. So you can see how our center of gravity is out in front here, center of lift. So if we were to lose airspeed, so if we start to drop like this, then the aircraft will naturally pitch down. So I can show you that. So there it is, pitching down, right? Because the amount of lift being generated with our reduced airspeed is less than the amount of weight, and so the nose pitches forward and it starts to descend, which will then increase airspeed and increase lift. So it's a nice sort of built-in recovery mechanism in the airplane. But if I was in a situation where, so let's recover back up here, come back up to level. So if we were in a situation where, there we go, okay. So let's say we're in a situation where we have a bunch of weight. So we've loaded up with as much fuel as we can. We've got just a ton of a payload to it, which is way outside of what we're allowed to bring on this plane. Oh, actually, they don't even let you do that, so I'll have to type it in. So let's say that we have a pilot, and we have a 300-pound pilot, we have a 300-pound co-passenger, and then we've brought, 200 pounds of luggage or something like that. So we're way over what our max weight is. The problem here is that and we'll talk more about where these numbers come from, but one of the problems here is that the wing can only generate a finite amount of lift. So at the airspeeds that we're flying, and at the airspeeds where this airplane can fly, there's only a certain amount of this up vector that can actually be created. And so if you overload it such that there's a bunch of weight pulling down, you cannot generate enough lift and you cannot fly. You won't be able to take off from the runway, but you also, if you somehow got in the air with all that weight, which you wouldn't be able to, but if you could, like we are, you would just descend. You aren't creating enough lift to actually fly the plane. So you can see that I'm losing altitude here, just trying to hold it. We could aggravate this a little bit. Maybe we'll put in 300 more pounds. 300 pounds. Okay, so there we go. So now we're pretty good and overweight. And so interesting. It's actually flipped. This tail is also now trying to generate lift because it's so far behind the center of lift. And you can see that I'm still losing altitude, and I'm also barely flying. So, okay. So let's bring this back to in limits again. So we'll do it like this. So the other one to show then is the actual loading. So if I put a bunch of cargo in the back, now I've moved the CG really far aft. So if I did stall, whereas before we saw that pitching moment, in this case, if I stall and I have the CG really far back, we won't pitch forward. Instead, we'll just... Let's see. Oh, that's interesting. I'm wondering if that's because of... Oh, geez. Okay. Okay, well, that also works. Okay, well, that wasn't exactly the behavior I expected to happen. I'm going to chalk it up to the sim acting oddly. Oh, sorry, Flying Turd. I don't know what you sent, but Nightbot has an auto thing about caps. So, sorry about that. Okay, so let me correct this real quick. Oh, I won't be able to. I have too much weight. Okay, so, well, good. So now this is kind of what I wanted to show in a different way. Just in that the incorrect loading makes it uncontrollable. It wasn't quite how I wanted to do it, but that's okay. That probably got the point across. So you do need to have it loaded at the correct CG so that you can actually control the airplane, especially through something like a stall. Oh, you did, yeah. It's cool. Way practice stall at a reasonably high altitude. Yes, shoots and flying turret, both of those two things are very true. So I'm at 800 feet is way too low to be doing stalls. And when we do the actual procedure, we want to be 3,000 feet above ground. But both of those two things are true. Also why we don't know the low. Okay, let's go back to the lesson. Last thing we'll talk about for situations is ice or frost accumulation on the wings. If it was really cold, we had some ice accumulating on the wings, which would happen if we flew through visible moisture, or maybe just frost in the morning when you go out to the airplane. Those both then change the airflow over the wing. They cause separation earlier, and they'll cause you to stall at a higher airspeed. At some point in your flying career, you'll probably go out for an early morning flight, and there'll be some frost on the wings. And it'll look maybe like, oh, it's just a thin layer. It follows the wing. It's really not that big a deal. And an important takeaway from this part of the conversation is even a very small amount of frost can dramatically change how the air will flow over your wing. It'll disrupt that airflow and it'll cause you to stall at much higher speeds. Don't go flying with frost on your wings. Brush it off if you can. One trick that works really well is just to turn the airplane into the sun a little bit and let it just melt off in the morning sun. That usually works pretty well. And it doesn't take super long too. If you turn the airplane when you first get there, do your pre-flight, by the time you're ready to go, it's usually gone. But don't take off with frost on your wings. Yeah, it's dangerous. It will increase your stall speed as well. All right, last, before we jump into actually doing the maneuvers, the stall recognition. So there's a couple of things that you'll notice at a stall. One of them, the sight, often when we're flying in kind of normal flying conditions, would be a high pitch up attitude. Again, you can stall at any attitude, you can stall at any airspeed, so don't use that as your only indication. But if you do find yourself really nose high, that's one sign that it may be an impending stall coming. Sound, you won't hear the airflow rushing across the airframe as much. And you can actually hear outside of the airplane some of the wind noise. So that's one thing to be listening for. In the sim, I don't think it comes through very well, but that is something that you start to get a sense for. You start to go, oh, wait a minute, the airflow doesn't sound quite right. Again, just an indication that you might be coming to a stall. And then last stall recognition is the feel. So you get kind of mushy controls. Remember I said that when the ailerons aren't getting as much airflow over them, they aren't as effective. You feel that as sort of this like control mushiness. Less effective, like I said. And the last one is buffeting, we talked about yesterday. So buffeting is actually the airflow coming off of the wing and then striking the horizontal stabilizer. But if it has that kind of eddy flow like we saw yesterday, where it's just really kind of turbulent, you feel that through the airframe. You can actually feel it on the controls as a sort of like bouncing up and down. Some airplanes have a really clear buffet. Some don't have any. I think 172s don't typically have great buffets. But like an Archer, a Piper Archer, you would probably feel it pretty cleanly. Two things. Yep. Yeah, I'm not sure that's what the word means, at least. The warning in the 737, I don't exactly know how they detect that. But yeah, that's exactly what it means. It's that those sort of eddies, it's like if you put a rock in a stream and then downstream of the rock, there's all those really turbulent eddies. If you have really broken up airflow because you're at a high angle of attack, same sort of thing. It's like this weird turbulent air strikes the tail and then causes the whole airplane to bump around a little bit. I did try to recreate it in the sim to see if we could actually see buffeting at all, and I could not create anything that was all that useful. So, having a lower speed, but I didn't think it was slow enough to stall. It makes sense now. Always hits during approach if it hits. Yep, that would be exactly what it is. So a buffet would be something you typically feel before you hear, again, depending on the design of the aircraft, but before you hear the stall horn, you might feel the buffeting because it's just that that broken up airflow hitting the tail. And so, if you're at a high enough angle of attack that you're creating that turbulence, then you can get buffeting. Yeah, that's a really good example. And you do sometimes hear it or feel it before you hear the stall horn. When we talk about the maneuvers, there's a step that we'll talk about, which is sort of like recognizing and acknowledging the stall. So obviously, when you're flying, you want to be aware of kind of what's causing the stall. But for the test, you want to actually verbalize that to the examiner. So you'd say something like, buffeting or stall horn or something that says, first indication of the stall. If you did feel the buffeting and you could identify it, that would be just fine as a first indication of a stall. Most people end up using the stall horn because it's really, really clear. And again, different airplane have different buffeting feels to them. But yeah. Okay, so let's go and jump into the power off stall. So I mentioned yesterday that I was going to go and clean up some of these maneuvers. And so I did. I standardized how I'm going to keep these in the notebook. Oops, let's see if I can do this. Oh, and the yellow does not show up very good here. Let's fix that real quick. So I have this as my kind of standard maneuver. This is what it looks like in the back end. Let's go with blue for now is fine. Okay, and if I go back here, sometimes it's a little picky. Okay, good. Blue, great. Blue and blue. Okay, great. So we'll start with the power off stall. And essentially the way I have this broken out is it's meant to be, let's change this for, now you can see the whole setup. So this is what I was working on last night is my setup so that all of this stuff is seamless. So essentially I made it so that if I have, for instance, this is an Archer 2 is the other aircraft I fly a lot. So I have it set up so that I can automatically generate all of the maneuvers for different aircraft. So this one is set up for the 172 SB, that's what we're flying now. But if I uncomment this, it would do the Archer. And then the certificate level, because they have different standards of completion. So this is for the private pilot. Okay, so let's save that. And make sure that we update this. Great, private pilot, 172, okay, looking good. So the power off stall is meant to simulate a stall that occurs as you're coming into land. So you're coming into land, you would have little or no power, slow airspeed, but you're also in the landing configuration. So power off stall, simulating stall during approach to landing. You sometimes hear it called something like that. It'll be like an approach to landing stall or something similar. But the FAA calls it the power off stall. The power on stall, then, in contrast, is a stall that you might experience on takeoff. So you think about, you're first rotating the plane, you're pulling off into the sky, you have full power in, but you can still cause a stall at any airspeed, at any attitude. And so, if you were pulling away from the airport and you pulled the nose up too high, you could still cause a stall there. And so this is to simulate a stall that might occur on takeoff. Again, we practice these stalls so that we know how to recognize them and we know how to recover from them before they become a problem. And we also know what not to do so that we don't do them in our normal flying. If you're stalling in your normal flying, that's not a good thing. It shouldn't be something that happens while you're flying around. But we do want to know how to identify them. We do want to know how to recover from them. And so we practice one stall, the power off stall, which is approach to landing, and then the power on stall, which is the stall on takeoff. They're very similar in recovery, but they're a little bit different in setup. So why don't we jump into the power off stall first? Since I'm already flying in the sim, how do I want to do this? What I'd like to do actually is have my, you know what, I'm going to try and combine these two real quick and see if I can actually get, I bet I can. Okay, so I'm going to try and overlay, we're going to turn off all of these niceties, and we'll just start flying from where we are. I have to climb, of course, and we'll talk about specific altitude, but I think I can go trying to quickly add my, sorry, 1 second. was trying to get it so you can see just the maneuver without much more. Yeah, I think that'll work. All right, well, we'll call that maybe good enough. Let's see what it looks like inside the plane. We're looking at things. Yeah, that's probably okay. Okay, so at least you can see then the maneuver up. Let me know if that's too blurry or too small to be useful, but it's really meant to be just sort of a reference as you're going flying. And the idea with these is you would actually have them in your lap and be able to see them as you're practicing. And you probably want to bring them along to the check ride with the FAA too, just to make sure that you have everything. Sorry, just to make sure that you because it just check ride is a long day, and so just to have a reference in your lap in case you want to reference and make sure that nothing's that you're not forgetting to do anything. So we'll use it today too because we're learning. So let me get everything set up. I'm just sort of turning on lights. This is not the right way to do airplane pre-flight mid-sky, but I think it'll be all right for this. So let's get flying here. So again, for climbs, pitch, power, and then trim. So I've got my powers at full. I'm going to climb at about, we're pretty low actually, so we'd probably climb at 74, but we can, yeah, so we'll pitch for 74. Let me make sure my sight picture is good. Great, there we go. Okay, so there's 74. We'll do a climbing turn to the left, so we're going to look under our wing, make sure there's no traffic. And then we're going to start our turn to the left. So we want to maintain 74. Because we're going to lose some of our lift into the horizontal plane, we do need a little bit more elevator pressure. Back, okay. But a little bit too much elevator pressure, and so we started to slow down. Okay, good. All right, so the first thing for this is we want to be at 3,000 feet AGL. So I'm going to continue climbing here, and I'm going to start climbing towards Mount Amanam. For the slow flight lesson, we talked a lot about choosing a practice area, identifying a field, and things like that. Those are all important things to do every time you're going to go out and fly maneuvers. We're in the same sort of practice area, so I won't belabor that point much more here. Oops. Okay, so I'm a little bit nose high. I can tell my airspeed is low. However, mostly we fly 90% of the time just looking out the window, so we want to fly in attitude. Then we cross-check our instruments to make sure that we're getting what we expect. Okay, good. So we're going to climb up to 3,500 here. And I will show over here again. Okay, so there's that equestrian field. That's a good emergency landing field if we need it, so we can use that. We'll climb towards Mount Amanam, and good idea to bug in the heading that you're going to use, so I'll do that real quick. Okay, good. Oops. A little bit off here. In some places, the Bay Area doesn't have great references for direction besides like the mountain ranges and the reservoirs and things like that. So we typically use Mount Amanam or Mount Diablo or Crystal Springs, and those all work really well. When I was doing my flight training in Minnesota, all the roads, for the most part in Minnesota, run north, south, east, west. And so, oops. It's not a great sign. Let's see why that froze. All right, well, I might lose my my sim here. At any rate, but the so my sim is frozen, so I'm giving it a second just to give it a second to respond. Yeah, so when you're flying in Minnesota, though, all of the roads will be north, south, east, west, and so those become really useful references too. So just depending on where you're actually practicing, you may have different things you're going to use for these references. We use a lot of mountains. All right, 50 feet before I want to start leveling off, so there's 50 feet before 350, pitch the nose down, get back to my level flight attitude, cross-check my instruments, make sure everything's leveling out how I expect. Give the plane a second to accelerate. So we want to get back to our cruise speed, which is about 105, 110 knots maybe. Okay, great. So now we're back at cruise speed. We're at the altitude we expect to be for this maneuver. I want to come back down to 3,500. Just make sure this is good. Okay, great. So start at the top of the maneuver. For every maneuver, we're always going to do this section in blue. That's why I changed the color of it. So the first thing is clearing turns. So we're going to do 2 90-degree turns. So we'll look under our right wing, turn right to the right first. And as we're doing this, we're scanning for traffic, looking at all of our quadrants. We can do these clearing turns, 20, even 30 degrees bank if you wanted. With a new student, I would, so I'm climbing there. You can see on my altimeter, so let the nose come down a little bit. But I'm just going to turn back to Crystal Springs here, and I don't want to be this high. I'd like to go to 3,500. So to do that, instead of, I'm just going to bring a little bit of power back, and that'll let me start to descend. It feels like it's really touchy. Where that is. All right, and then I'll bring my power back to cruise power. We get 50 feet above where we want to level off. There's Crystal Springs in the distance. Okay, there we go. So again, we want to be flying a particular attitude. So get my sight picture. It looks like what I expect. 2,400. Okay, great. What I wasn't doing during that, and what I should have been, is scanning for traffic in all my quadrants. So you want to make sure that you have the whole area cleared. You're also making yourself visible to other planes that might be flying around, so you're kind of raising your wings out to the horizon. So now we've done 180-degree turn is, or you can do 2 90-degree turns, like left and right, or you can do a 180-degree turn, which is also 2 90-degree turns, just the same direction. As long as you're clearing all the quadrants, that's okay. Emergency field ID'd, so just off my left side there, just off the left side of the cowling, you can see, so that's my emergency field. I like that field. All right, and we're gonna start the actual maneuver. We are above 3,000 feet AGL. I can confirm that on my iPad if I want, and I would confirm it on my iPad because it's kind of bumpy around in this area. Bring the power to 1,500. So we're reducing that power to slow down, and we want to hold altitude. So this is similar to the slow flight, how we entered it. We bring the power to 1,500, and then we're just slowly giving elevator pressure to keep the plane flying level. Once we get to 65, every speed that we would normally bring in flaps for approach, we'll bring in flaps. So at 80 we bring in flaps. At 70 we bring in flaps, which is their 70. And then 65. And at 65 we start to let ourselves descend. And so we're setting up as though we were coming into land. So 1,500 RPM, 65 knots. Going a little slow here, so I'm going to increase. There you go. All right, and we can let ourselves descend for just a moment to make sure everything's kind of stabilized as we expect. So we're at 65, we're descending, 1,500 RPM, looks good. Then we, descend power off. So then I bring the full power out, so 65 still descending. And we're gonna take our nose and slowly pitch up. We wanna keep our same heading, so we're heading towards Crystal Springs. Slowly pitching the nose up, you see the airspeed's dropping. I'm gonna get the stall horn here any moment. Verbally, I don't have my headphones on so I can't hear it. Verbally acknowledge the stall horn's probably right there. Continue pitching until we get a full stall, and then the airplane pitches forward. Bring in full power, flaps up to 20, and then pitch up to the horizon. And I am going to put my headphones on because I need to hear the stalls. Anyone else having sign-in issues? G. Hasselhoff, can you talk a little bit more about that? I don't know what that means. And thank you, I appreciate that. Okay, so then the last thing we do is start to recover. So once we have a 60 or 74, our VY speed, positive rate of climb, we'll bring in flaps 10, let it stabilize, go flaps 0, and we'll climb back up to 3,500. We want to climb at 74 and get back up to our starting height. Okay. Oops, I'm climbing a little steep. Wasn't paying attention to my sight picture. That's why they say don't twitch, chat, and fly. here we go. So 50 before 3,500, leveling off to the horizon. And then after the airplane accelerates, then we can bring power back to 2,400. And trim out that control pressure. All right. So let's try that maneuver again. So we're going to do the same process. Always starts the same. We do our clearing turns. So we'll do a look under our right wing, excuse me. Okay, and we can do 180 degrees, so 2 90-degree right turns. Oops. And sign into Microsoft Flight Sim. Ooh, no, I don't know about that. Where else might they mention? The Discord is usually where I get the most real-time sort of information. So if you have a Discord, the Microsoft Flight Sim Discord, if other people are having the issue, that's a good place to find out. Okay, so as I'm rotating here, I'm always scanning for traffic, looking to clear my quadrants. Okay, make sure everything's good. I did do something there that I didn't like, which I will cop to and then try and do better next time. And that is, I did the whole 180 degrees in one turn. It's better to do 2 90-degree turns where you level off between, because you want to look under your wing before you do that second right 90-degree turn. So in doing them all together, I didn't know if there was traffic to my right that I just turned into. It's better, again, to look out your window, check for traffic, turn 90 degrees to the right, level off. Look out your window for traffic, turn 90 degrees to the right, again, level off. You don't want to be doing that all in one long turn like that. It's not a great way to do the clearing, because you're not really clearing the area super effectively then if you're actively turning into traffic. So. Okay, 2,400, 2,400 RPM, 3,500 altitude, pretty level. Seems like I got a little bit of a coming down here. Okay, great. So we'll do that same maneuver again. Did our clearing turns. We have our emergency field in sight. It's that one off to the left there. Okay, that would work. Mixture rich, carb heat on. We don't have carb heat in this plane, so that's okay. And altitude greater than 3,000, good. Power to 1,500, so we'll bring the power back. And as the power comes back, we're pitching up slowly to try and hold altitude. Not to try, but to hold altitude. Again, I'm flying towards Mount Amanum. I want to hold my heading stable here. Okay, 80 knots, bring in the first notch of flaps. 70 knots, second notch of flaps. 65, full flaps, and we bring out full power. Let the plane start to descend. Lost a little bit more airspeed than I would have liked. And we want to get as though we're coming into land, so we should be at 65 knots, full flaps. And we'll let it come down like this. Okay. So I'm a little slow. I'm going to let the plane catch up. And descend power off at 65 knots. Pitch up slowly for full stall. So I'm going to continue pitching up. Lost my heading a little bit. I love that. There we go. Slowly pitching up. And first indication of stall. Continue to pitch up to full stall. All right, full stall. Oop. All right. Pitch down. Bring the first knots of flaps up. And then fly level to the horizon. Good. As we get vertical rate of climb and we're above 74, we bring in our next notch of flaps and our next notch of flaps. All right, so we had a little bit of a spin initiating there. And what I did to recover from that was bring in my rudder, which I suspect I didn't have correctly. So I'm going to go back up to 3,000. We'll go 3,200. And then I'm going to start to slow down here, and I want to see if I can recreate what I just did. So I'm going to go 1,500 again. 20 degrees of flaps at 70 knots. 65 full flaps. Power off. Do you want to pitch towards Mount Amanum? So I'm going to descend at 65. Come on, there we go. Great. Okay. Descending correctly. Everything's stabilized. Good. Slowly pitch the nose up. And I'm expecting to need more and more right rudder. And I'm wondering if yeah, so see how the ball's centered? I'm using no right rudder. That's not really how it would work. Okay, so there's this pitch. So I pitch the nose forward, flaps to 20, and then bring the nose back up to the horizon, let it accelerate. Positive rate of climb at 74. Bring up our next notch of flaps. Continue to climb. We can bring in full flaps. We don't want to bring in flaps all at once. It's better to let it kind of stabilize at each flap setting, because every time you change the flaps, you change the shape of the wing, and it changes the flying dynamics. So if you just totally change flaps all at once, it can make the plane really hard to control. All right, so we're going to continue climbing here. Again, we'll do our clearing turns. So going off to the right, 90 degrees to the right, coming back up to 3,500, climbing at 74 knots. So through the clearing turn, I'm looking for traffic. I'm making myself visible to other airplanes. About 100 to 3,500. We get 50, then we pitch our nose to the horizon. Bring the power back to, let the plane accelerate to cruise speed. Good. Okay, I didn't do the thing I wanted to do again. So again, 90 degrees, looking around for traffic. Again, look under my wing, and then finish the turn direction. We've also got back up to our cruise speed, so I'll bring the power to 2,400. And okay, let's get my sight picture fixed here. There we go. Great. Okay, great. 2,400, 2,400 RPM, 3,500 altimeter. Looking good. All right, let's do the power. Oh, did I just close that one? That's funny. We'll do the power on stall. So again, this is simulating a stall during takeoff. Let's do the same thing. We just did our clearing turns. We have our emergency field ID'd. Mixture rich. Still rich because we've been in maneuvers. Altitude greater than 3,000, good. Power to 1,500 RPM, and we're starting to slow down. This time we're slowing to VX, which is 62 knots. We'll talk more about VY and VX a little later on, but VX is the best rate of climb speed. So we use it for this. Oops, okay, so I lost a little bit of altitude. I should stay at 3,500. Once we get to 62 knots, then we're going to bring in 65% power, which is 2,100, so 62 knots. Now remember, this is a takeoff stall, so I don't need any flaps or anything. And I'm putting in power as though I'm using it to take off. And then I slowly continue pitching up to cause the stall. We expect to stall. There you go. There's first indication of stall. Keep going up. Notice my... Oh, this is good. Okay, actually. I was on the wrong screen. Sorry, I wanted to show something. Okay, let's recover from the stall correctly. So, gain some airspeed, full power, and then recover. Come back to the altitude we were flying at. Okay, so we can go to 3,300, still over 3,000 AGL. There's 3,300. Plane accelerate. Good. Okay. So what I wanted to show. Watch when I do this stall and watch what happens to the slip skid indicator. So I wasn't seeing this in the power off stall, and I don't know why. I would expect it in the real world, and I'm wondering if it's some sim artifact maybe. But you will need right rudder to correct. So sorry, I was just playing with the rudders. That's why I all got, because I have active pause on, so it's sort of accounting for my inputs. So watch the slip skid indicator, and you'll notice the ball move to the right. I'll call it out, and then I'll apply right rudder pressure to sort of keep the plane flying coordinated. If I don't keep the right amount of rudder pressure, then that's where we start to enter potentially a spin on the when the stall happens. So that actually happened the last time we were just flying there a second ago. You saw that one of the wings dropped. That's because I was flying uncoordinated. And so let me see. How we're doing on time too. Great. Okay, good. Because I do want to do, after we go through these maneuvers, I want to do them again, but looking at the actual forces using the developer mode tools that they have, because it's pretty cool to see the stall actually happen, and you can look at all the forces involved. So anyway, okay, so let's do this again. So we'll say that we've done our clearing turns. ID the emergency mixture rich carbon on. Carbon in this plane. Altitude is greater than 3,000. Yep. Power to 1,500. So I'll do pause. This plane keep flying. Again, I want to hold altitude, so I bring it to 1,500, and then slowly pitch up. This is a power on stall, so we don't do any flaps. We're simulating a stall on takeoff. Okay, holding back. At 62, we're going to go to 62 knots. We'll go to 2,100 RPM. Okay, there's 62. Bring up to 21. And slowly pitch up. Maintain our heading. And okay, so right there. So notice the ball is, I'm about to stall coming out of this. No, that's right. We'll deal with that in a second. So notice how far the ball is to the right. Part of that is because the game has continued simulating, and so it's actually simulating way through the stall with the plane not falling yet. So that's a little bit of a weird artifact. But that right ball deflection does happen. So that's because of the left turning tendencies, part of the aerodynamics of how the airplane works. I have that in a future lesson. Yeah. Oh, okay. So now it's simulating us spinning out and falling to the ground. So let's see if I can fix this. And I may not be able to, because I think the sim has us really, really falling out of this wrong. I'm going to do this. So we can get some of this back. Yeah. All right. So, all right. Well, to recover, so we pitch the nose down, get to 74, start climbing up, and then return to our original altitude. So we'll just do a normal stall recovery here. Okay, so again, we're coming up. We'll go 3,300. Pitch for level. The aircraft accelerate back to cruise speed. Good. Okay, and then we're going to bring power to 1,500, start to slow the airplane down, hold our altitude. Gained about 100. We'll use 3,400 for the start here. Okay, so as the airplane's slowing, still holding back pressure to keep that altitude. And at 62, now we bring it to 2,100 RPM. Oops, too much. Start to pitch the aircraft back. Now look at the slip skid indicator. You'll see the ball. So I'm slowly applying. There you go. And I need more right rudder pressure, more right rudder pressure, more right rudder pressure. Good. Still coordinated. There's the first indication. And full stall. Okay. So let me recover here. So we full power, pitch down, gain some airspeed, and then recover back to our original heading and airspeed. So, all right. So we can go 3,400. That's okay. Oops, I have a little bit too much right rudder pressure in. So I didn't like some of the ways that the sim simulated that. There was a little bit of me not keeping the rudders coordinated, so I'll cop to that one. What seems to happen here is that this slip skid indicator is super, super sensitive, and so it doesn't, how do I put this? Like in the real plane, there's a little bit of a delay, and so, I don't know, I guess it doesn't feel the same. Anyway, maybe I'm just making excuses for my own entering a spin as I did that. But you did get to see the right rudder that was needed, so I was putting in right rudder as I was stalling. And then through the stall, because I was coordinated, it should have just stalled straight forward. It shouldn't have done that spin entry that it started to do. So that's, maybe it was something I was doing, perhaps it was the sim. But okay. How often do you instruct? Hey, Hasselhoff. So I'm a new CFI actually. So I am currently applying to flight schools around the Bay. So I do these streams every day, which kind of make sure I'm fresh on my lessons that I've been doing. And also making sure that they make sense to students, which is a key part of the battle. But otherwise, the goal is to be instructing full time. So assuming that some of these interviews coming up go well, then I'll have to change the stream time actually, because I'll be instructing during the or if the bay continues to have really bad rainstorms, then yeah, that's right, California. I'm in near San Francisco. Actually, we're flying in the practice area that I fly in. So, like, the airport off to the right is one of the main airports I fly out of. So, that's part of the reason I chose this area, is I can actually see what landmarks make sense for maneuvers. So, Crystal Springs to Mount Amanum, this back and forth we're doing, is the back and forth that I did when I was getting my private pilot to practice stalls and a bunch of other maneuvers. So, yeah, so it's kind of fun. And it's interesting because as a student, I didn't really think about it. But now that I'm trying to teach the lesson, I'm going, oh, between Crystal Springs, this reservoir, which is really clear, and Mount Amanum, which is directly behind us, is a 180-degree turn. And so you can do your clearing turns, you can keep in a specific area. So it's just like a nice little corridor, basically. And there's nice emergency fuels. So, Vacaville, yeah. Yeah, it's been nuts weather-wise. I mean, we're record-setting rains and storms, which we never get storms in the Bay. I grew up in Minnesota, and so it's kind of fun isn't quite the right word, but it's a nice callback to the storms we had in the Midwest, but we don't get storms like that in the Bay, so it's been really weird here. Flying Turd, yep, I do the live streams every day, 11 p.m. Pacific time to 1 p.m. Pacific time. So, yeah, we do need it. We need the rain really bad. It's actually really interesting to walk around. Some of the trails that my wife and I will go and walk in the Bay, actually have water in the creeks. So you might even be able to see it, but you can kind of see how there's like all these, the big slows out here all have water in them because they're connected to the Bay system. But like right down below where this plain is, there's creek beds that are often totally dry, and I've never seen water in them. And recently, though, they're like, rushing water everywhere. Apparently, LA's got the same sort of thing going on. Everybody knows. Ah, sorry, Flying Turd. Yeah. Nope, it's every day. Yeah, so we're on lesson 4. Make sure I got that right. Yeah, we're on lesson, 5, sort of. I skipped around a little bit. Yeah, that is awesome. Thanks. Yeah, we got some fun maneuvers, takeoffs, traffic pattern work, a lot of stuff that I think is really good fundamentals. Even if you just want to do sim flying stuff, I think it's really, really, really helpful. Good extreme flying weather all the time. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, shoots. I was definitely thinking, because I did a bunch of training in Wisconsin as well, and I would go out and it would be 15 degrees Fahrenheit in the morning. And the plane I was using was hangared, was nice, but any of the planes that were on the ramp would just have frost or a bunch of other stuff. And we'll get frost in the base sometimes too. Be awesome for him and I to watch. Yeah, that'd be great. Young Eagles is a great program, and of course, if you guys want to tune in, I think that's wonderful. Yeah, it's meant to just be kind of a fun, educational bit on flying. So, yeah, no, that's awesome. Sure. All right, so we're doing pretty good on time. Let's keep going here with our stalls. So we had a stall. You saw that we needed a bunch of right rudder as the airplane slowed down. When the airplane's slower, we have more left-turning tendencies that emerge, and so we need more right rudder to counteract them. That will also come up when we talk about takeoffs and landings. But you'll see it a lot with takeoffs, because the airplane will want to turn to the left as you're trying to taxi, or as you're trying to accelerate down the runway. So you'll see me using a lot of right rudder just to keep the airplane aligned. But that's a big part of the reason when we do this power on stall is to practice using that right rudder to make sure that we're staying coordinated. All right, let's go fly. And what we're going to do this time, we'll do another, so we'll go 3,400 here for altitude, accelerate back to cruise flight, 2,400 RPM. I'm gonna do my clearing turn again, so we'll do that same maneuver. Oops. So I'm looking under my wing to the right, lift the wing, check for traffic, turn 90 degrees. Okay, there we go. Okay. And I know these clearing turns take a little bit, and the whole time you're sort of not only scanning for traffic, but also dividing attention with your flight attitude and then cross-checking on the instruments. So I know it's sort of a lot of mental load to be doing these and making sure you're staying clear of traffic. Really important for safety. And it's really good practice for making turns automatic. Okay, so again, I'm leveling off at 90, looking around for traffic, all quadrants, lift my wing, check for traffic before I turn back 90 again. And so we're going to go back to Mount Amanum, which is also what I have bugged up in the heading indicator there. So throughout this whole turn, I'm scanning for traffic. 3,500 is fine for the stall. Right, I'm sorry, 2,000, yeah, 3,500 altitude is good. Okay, and we want to roll out, start our rollout half of so the number of degrees before the heading we want to roll out on. We want to start that, hold on, let me pause this and think of a better way to say this. Whatever your bank angle is, so we were just doing that turn at about 20 degrees bank angle. Half of that is how many degrees before the heading you want to roll out to, you should start rolling out. So if I want to roll out on a heading of 180, a directly south heading, and I'm banking 20 degrees, I want to start rolling out of that turn at 170 so that I finish rolling out at the heading of 180. Hopefully that's helpful. If you saw it written, it would be really easy to understand. Let me just make a note actually about that. Okay. Well, my hand-wavy explanation I'll have to do for today. All right. So let's do another stall here, and this time I want to do a banked stall. So you'll notice in the maneuver success criteria here, we want to hold our heading plus or minus 10 degrees, or if we're doing it as a banked turn, we want to hold the bank less than 20 degree bank, and we need to hold it plus or minus 10 degrees. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a 20 degree bank stall, a turn to the right, and then we'll do a power off stall. So I'm going to flip back to our other. So again, power off stall is our approach to landing stall. We'll do it as a bank turn, and the important thing about stalling during a bank turn is that the recovery is the exact same. Just pitch the nose down, and really you're just pitching just below the horizon. I know I continue in this to drop the nose super far down. What it really should be is that as soon as you hear the stall occur, you just pitch to the horizon. And we'll also do these as first indication of stall we recover. So the last few we've done full stall, wait for the airplane to force the nose down and then recover. We definitely want to practice those, but we also want to practice recovering at first indication. So as soon as I hear the stall horn, lower the nose, bring the flaps up to 20, accelerate. Once we get to VY, flaps to 10, and then flaps 0. Okay, so we'll do this. Press it on the right screen. Okay, there we go, 3,500. So we did our clearing turn. We have our emergency field, mixture's rich, car repeat is not part of this airplane. Over 3,000 feet AGL, looking good. Power to 1,500 to start to slow down. And remember, I'm increasing back pressure to hold the airplane at the same altitude. We're going to stay at 3,500. And I want to stay pointed towards Mount Amanum, so I'm going to come back here just a little bit, slight bank. At 80, we bring in 10 degrees of flaps, and that's going to start to slow us down pretty quickly. 70, 20 degrees of flaps. As soon as we get to 65, we're full flaps, power off, and let the plane start to descend at 65. Trim this out just a little bit. Okay, so I'm still at 60. Let's get to 65. There we go, good. Okay, and then I'm using trim to make sure that I am trimmed for the airspeed of 65. So you set your airspeed with your trim. Good. All right, and then we're gonna pitch up slowly for the stall and start to turn to the right. We're gonna need a little bit of right rush pressure. There we go, there's our 20 degree bank, and first indication, pitch the nose down, full power, flaps to 20. And then as the airplane accelerates, bring the nose back up to the horizon. Good. Start to climb. So we're at 64. I want to get to 74. Okay, once we're at 74, start to bring flaps 20, and then flaps 10. Good. And then we can recover back to the original heading that we started. Since we were doing a turn, we don't necessarily expect to finish in the same heading because we were turning through it. Okay, so bring this back. Okay, back to Mount Eminem. We can go 3,300. Again, we would do our clearing turns. I do the emergency field, mixture rich. We will start here. This time, let's do a power on stall. So again, we get slow the same way, 1,500. Holding our altitude, 62. We bring in power to 21. And then we're going to pitch the aircraft up to cause a stall. We'll do a left turn this time. So we'll go to bank of 20. There's my bank of 20. And looking at my skid, slip skid indicator, the ball, make sure it's centered. First indication of stall, lower the nose to the horizon, full power, and come back to the altitude we started at. Okay, let the plane accelerate. Good. And 3,400. Now we can turn back to Mount Eminem. So hopefully that makes sense. The first indication of the stall, you want to recover right away. The only reason you would go to a full stall is because the federal examiner is going to ask you how to recover from a full stall. And so we do need to practice it. But in reality, well, one thing in reality, you shouldn't be stalling anyway. But if you did stall, you'd want to recover at the first indication. So let's just do a straight ahead power on stall here just to show staying coordinated, but then also how much of a non-event a stall recovery is when you stay coordinated through it and when you recover at first indication. So again, same thing. We'll say we did our clearing turns. I do the emergency field. 1,500, slowing down. We get to 62. And we're going to bring in power to 2,100. Sorry, I have the wrong maneuver being shown. More right rudder needed. Holding our heading, continuing to pitch up. Pitching up, pitching up. More right rudder, more right rudder. And first indication to stall. Lower the nose to the horizon, full power. Let the plane accelerate. Good. Okay, one thing I did want to show, and I'm just going to go right into another stall here. It's 2,100, pitching up, more right rudder. If I immediately pull the nose up again, so we stall, more right rudder. Oops, no stall horn. Okay, well, there we go. So if I went like that and then immediately pitched up again, you hear how we got a secondary stall there? So that's one of the risks of aggressively trying to recover. So you want to make sure you've gained some airspeed before you try and pitch up again. So let me show that one more time. So if I pitch up for a stall with 2,100, okay, coming close to stall. Where's that stall horn? There's stall horn. If I put the nose down, but then immediately pitch it back up, stall horn again, stall horn again. And so to have the stall stop, all I need to do is lower the nose. All right, stall horn, lower the nose, just below the horizon. But if I pull it up and then try to like aggressively pitch up to climb again, you could enter a secondary stall. The reason I point that out is it's one of our common errors we'll talk about in about 2 seconds. And it's also something that causes people to fail their private pilot check ride. So if you recover from the stall, you want to make sure you give your nose a second below the horizon to gain enough speed that you can actually start to pull back up to climb up. Okay, let's see. Okay, Flying Turd, seeing your messages here. Let me see. There we go. That would be breaking the Bravo right there. So the Bravo ceiling is 4,000. So we don't want to do that. I can't read this. I don't know why it's not. Do you always keep your rudder neutral? No. So you definitely need right rudder as you're getting into slow flight. So we're doing actually pretty good on time. So let me see if I can show some of these different aerodynamic things. So I'm going to slow down to 1,500. We'll hold 3,900 is okay, just to kind of demonstrate it. There's 62, so this is where we would bring in power. I'm going to keep going with this. I'm not using eddy rudder right now. Do you see how the ball is starting to deflect to the right? More to the right, more to the right. So I need to be using, I'm going to lower the nose here. So I need to be using some right rudder to counteract. There you go. So now I'm putting in a little bit of right rudder. Okay, and if I remove the right rudder again, the nose yaws to the left a little bit because there's left turning tendencies. So I do need a little bit to the right. That also helps me stay coordinated in flight. And so a key part of that coordination is if I did stall here, the nose would pitch. Oops, sorry, do it this way. If I did stall here, the nose would pitch straight forward instead of, okay, so there you go. You can see how much is, I did the active pause, but you can see how much is deflected to the right now. During stall recover, do you always, no, so Flying Turd, yeah, for stall recovery, the short version is you want to stay coordinated in your flight, which means you want to center the ball. And so right now the ball is deflected to the right, and so I would put in some right rudder, and that would center it again. Oops, a little bit too much. There you go. So a little bit of right rudder, you step on the ball, center it again. And even during recovery, you'd have the same basic philosophy. You want to step on the ball and recover. And stay coordinated. I'm going to take off my headphones because I can hear my own voice with the headphones on, and I appreciate that you all can put up with it, but there's something about listening to your own voice, right? Okay, so let me show the sim forces here. So you can see, if you look at the slip skid indicator, right, there's this is showing us that we're not coordinated, and what it means to be not coordinated is that the fuselage of the plane, yeah, roger that, keep the ball in the center, exactly right, yeah. So for a new student who's just starting out and just practicing some of these things, the simple answer is keep the ball centered and everything else will be good. But there's a couple of things that you do that cause the ball to become uncentered, and one of them is when you deflect ailerons, you get that adverse yaw. And so if I were to, for instance, let me zoom out here so you can see. So if I were to deflect my ailerons to the right, actually, let me do it to the left. I'll aggravate it. So if I go to the left, I'm going to have adverse yaw to the left. I'm sorry, to the right, which means I need to step on my left rudder to pull the nose through the horizon. So if I go to the left here, I expect the ball. Actually, let me go to the right because sorry, let me say this again. If you turn to the right, the use of the ailerons creates more drag on the up aileron when you're turning to the right, when you're going that direction. The up aileron is the one to the right. Creates more drag on the one that goes down, which would be the one to the left. That additional drag causes the nose to yaw to the left. And so to counteract that adverse yaw, you need to add additional right rudder. So if I were to turn to the right now, see the ball is deflecting, but then once you're in the turn, it stabilizes back. So you only need that right rudder when you're initiating the turn. At the same time you put in the aileron, you also apply right rudder. So here's me applying some right rudder, trying to keep the ball centered. And then after I've established the turn, you remove that rudder, and it goes back. This is very, very touchy, but there you go. So that's one place where you get that the ball will, you may enter uncoordinated flight is when you're doing those turns. So that's a really common one. You always want to step at the ball, step on your rudder in the same direction you're turning. So right rudder, right turn sort of thing. So step on the right rudder, turn the ailerons to the right, and then you release the rudder after you've established the turn. When you're then coming back from that turn, you're then have to turn the ailerons to the left to bring it back to center. Same thing, you want a little left rudder. And then once you're neutral, you neutralize it again. Stream close to grading, it's getting low bandwidth warning. Okay, thanks for the heads up, Flying Turd. Yeah, this is so one of the things that I did is I'm playing with OBS's beta feature that allows it to calibrate for stream quality. The good news is it seems like I have no dropped frames, but the bad news, yeah, like right now I'm getting 200 kilobits per second or something. So, Flying Turd, my current theory is that, yeah, it's okay, good. It's great 85% of the time. Yeah. I don't really know. Let me see if I can turn this on. So this is what I was playing with yesterday to see if I could get a little bit more consistent performance. And yeah, I'm seeing the kilobits it's like down to like 100 or something. So it's probably really bad. Oh, sorry about that. When I upload it to YouTube, I'll have the original recording, so it'll be a little bit more crisp, hopefully. Unfortunately, I don't think there's much more I can do. I'll try and keep an eye on it. If it drops really low, like it was just at like 100, I'll try and pause real quick so we can at least get the feedback. So now I'm seeing it's about 3,000. Hopefully it stays a little bit more. Okay, so we're talking about, yeah, thank you very much. No, I appreciate the heads up. Yeah, my current theory is it's something about the storms in the bay are causing something with the internet infrastructure to be rough. That's my best debugging, but yeah. So anyway, thanks for the heads up. Okay, so like I said, there are certain times you need right rudder. The other one is when you're in slow flight because of the left turning tendencies we'll talk more about later. And so anytime you're flying slow, you're probably going to need some amount of right rudder, like we are flying slow right now, and so we need a little right rudder. So it's not happening this last month. Okay, great. Flying turret, thanks. Appreciate the feedback on it. That's good to know. So I'll keep going. And then, yeah, once again, when it goes up on YouTube, hopefully it'll be full quality. So be able to at least see the whole thing if there's anything that got missed. So, yeah, so like I said, there's left turning tendencies when you're at slow speeds because there's aerodynamic forces that are kind of masked more when you're at high speeds. The plane just kind of flies like an arrow straight forward. But when you're slow, you see some of these effects a little bit more pronounced. So right now you can see the ball is deflected to the right. If I wanted to be flying this slow, just above stall speed here, I would need a little bit of right rudder, so I'm putting in a little bit of right rudder now. Essentially what that does, coordinated flight means that your airplane is moving, the fuselage is parallel to the direction of the relative wind. So you're moving forward directly through the wind. And so in practice, what that looks like is, so remember the ball is off to the right a little bit right now, right? And so if we look at the actual forces acting on the plane, you can see that there's a little bit of this force coming off of the tail here. So the wind is actually coming a little bit more from the right, and it's hitting the tail some, the vertical stabilizer. So if I were to speed up, I'd be going fast enough that that force would be strong enough to just fly me straight, unless I had trimmed it in a way that it wasn't doing that. So you could force it to not, but it's designed so that it would just kind of fly straight when it's properly trimmed for yaw. We don't need to necessarily get into that, but when it's at slow flight, you really can, the additional force on the horizontal stabilizer is more pronounced. And so to make up for that, if I apply a little bit of right rudder, so now I'm putting in some right rudder, you can see the airplane sort of swing to the right. And, oops, that's a little bit more than I meant to do. And we should see these sort of reduce, yeah, as the fuselage is no longer, so now we're flying parallel with the relative wind, as opposed to before when I removed the rudder. Now we have wind that's actually hitting us on the side. So if I were to go really aggressive, we know we're flying forward, the wind is coming at us this way, and I were to put in just a bunch of left rudder and really rotate the plane. You can't really see it because I'm hooked to the plane. But now we would have a bunch of force on our tail here, but also then we're flying at an angle to the wind, so that's uncoordinated flight. One of the other artifacts of that with uncoordinated flight is you have additional lift being generated on the side that is to the upwind. So when I apply, let me go back in the plane, you can see the ball. So I have a bunch of left rudder in. You can tell that I'm super uncoordinated here. The ball's all the way off to the right. And if we look out on the actual airplane, you see that there's a lot more lift being generated on the wing that's being pushed forward into the wing. So stepping on the left rudder, you can see my rudder is deflected here. Wind is coming over this side and it's generating a bunch more lift on this wing. What that means is if I were to stall right here, because I have so much more lift being generated there, the airplane's going to roll to the left, and that's how we would enter a spin. So if I go back here and continue flying here, so I'm holding just a bunch of left rudder, and my theory is that I'm generating so much more lift on my wing that I'm pushing out forward into the airstream that if I were to continue flying, there you go. So it just dips and spins like that. Okay, so let's recover here. So get back up to our Correct airspeed, 3,400 is fine. 1,500. Let's see if I can slow down again. So I'm sort of pitching up a little more aggressively to get back to the speed I want more quickly. You really should hold the altitude as you're entering the stall. You don't want to be climbing or descending. Okay. All right, so we'll pause right here. Okay, so again, now we're coordinated flight. So this was, if I go left rudder, again, I'm pushing the right wing into the airstream. I'm generating more lift on the right wing. I'm uncoordinated. If I go right rudder, then the opposite happens. So I'm pushing the left wing into the airstream and I'm generating more lift in the left, again, uncoordinated. What I want is I want even lift on both sides. So notice here, now I'm at slow flight, right? I'm actually really slow, probably too slow. Let's see if I can get some airspeed back. Probably at the right attitude. Okay, good. Let's see if we can just unstall this for the sake of demonstration. Sorry, so I'm in active pause. So what happens in active pause is that all of the changes that I apply to like the forward thrust from the engine or like if I change the wind or anything, all of that affects the airplane and it starts to stabilize where it would, which is nice. Okay, great. So we're in slow flight. We have ball you can see is off to the right as we expect, right? We would need some right rudder to counteract that to stay coordinated. What it looks like then in the plane, we are not coordinated, and so we would expect, we expect to see a little bit more lift generated on the right wing. But if I then put in a little bit of right rudder, then we're back to coordinated. We should see equal lift on both sides, and then if we were to stall, okay, let's see if I can get this. I think I might be, there we go. And if we were to stall while we are coordinated, then the nose just pitches down, and it's kind of a non-event. Just recover from it. All right, while we have all of these nice force things going here, I'm going to attempt to fly into a stall from a side angle like this, so you can see what happens. And so there's a couple of things I want you to be looking for. I was playing with this earlier, and I didn't love it, because remember, you should see the stall start from the beginning and go to the outside, and I didn't love that it didn't seem to progress that way. Maybe it was just happening too fast, so maybe we'll see it right now, but yeah, so I'm going to fly it at an angle like this, and we're going to watch the, how do I do this? We'll do it like this. And we're going to watch the stall progress, and you'll see that after I exceed the critical angle of attack, then we lose all of our lift, and you'll see, well, I'm going to put my headphones on, see if I can hear the stall horn. Outside. Okay. So we'll see if I see the stall, or hear the stall horn from the outside, but otherwise you should see as we approach a stall, and then you'll see the full stall. So let's unpause here. Oop. Okay. So trying to fly at an angle, a little bit of right rudder. So there we go. And then approaching the stall, we'll hold off. There's the first indication. And there's the stall. Right, and so the nose drops down, and we can recover. So you can hear the stall horn, which is nice. So now, let's apply, we'll do flaps. So flaps 10, flaps 20, we'll get to 70. 65, we'll go full flaps. Let our plane start to decelerate. This is not... It's really hard to fly this from the side. Okay, so I'm trying to get to 65 knots. We're setting up for our power off stall. So once we're descending at 65... Oops. Okay. So now we're descending at 65 knots. Good, so I'm going to remove all power. And we'll start to pitch up. Okay, more right rudder, more right rudder. There's the first indication of stall, and full stall. Pitch the nose forward, full power, flaps to 20, recover our airspeed, pitch up to horizon, 74, bring our next flaps. Oops. Okay, so you can at least see the stall as it occurs, how the, you can see the lift collapsing on the wind, or on the wing, excuse me. And then that's what causes the stall. The other interesting thing, let's do one of these. All right. Oh, why the sim is being so uncooperative today. There we go. Okay, great. Alright, well, that's fine. So one of the other things we can look at then is start to bring in, where are we at? 10 degrees flaps. Okay, so we'll start to slow down for an approach to landing stall. 20 degrees when we get to 70. And then full flaps at 65. Planes start to descend. So if I bring in, let's say I am not coordinated as I stall. So I have a bunch of left rudder applied. You can see the ball it's not centered anymore. I guess the ball's not centered. So here's what the forces are doing outside the plane. So you notice how the left wing, there you go. Okay. So, well, it only lasts a second, but you can kind of see that the left wing, which was being pushed out into the airstream. Sorry, let me see if I can get this to actually hold. So the left wing, which is being pushed out into the airstream, is generating more lift and continuing to fly longer than the right wing. And so when that happens, when we have that uncoordinated flight, that lift from the left wing rolls the airplane over. And so that would be the spin entry. Now, if we were coordinated instead, so I put in my right rudder, see if I can center this again. You can see that there's even lift across it. And so although we're stalling evenly. And so the nose just comes straight down. And then again, you can recover like normal. Flaps 20. And then 74, flaps 10. And positive rate of climb will go. There you go. So, okay. I hope that was a useful demonstration. We'll talk a little bit more about that with spin stall awareness, but yeah, it's kind of nice to see some of the forces that are going on the wings and why it causes you to roll and why staying coordinated is so important. So I hope that was sort of useful. I was trying to find some way to actually visualize the wind so you could see the relative wind. I didn't find anything great, but if someone knows of a way to do that with the developer tools, please shoot me a message. I'd love to actually show, when I say that we're, kicking the wing out to the front, what do I mean by that? All right. Looking good on time. Why don't we finish off the lesson here? So flip back to my lesson plans. So common errors: not maintaining rudder coordination, causing the wing to drop during stall, entering the spin. This is all stuff we were just talking about. Delay in stall recovery, causing excessive altitude loss or spin entry. So when you do have that first indication of stall, remember you want to pitch the nose down to the horizon. You don't want to just keep pulling back on it. This is a really tough one psychologically, and the case where you hear it most often from a pilot who has made a poor choice and is trying to take off with like trees at the end of the runway or something is, they're climbing out and they're maybe climbing at their best rate of climb and they've calculated it. They believe they can clear the trees, which would be a red flag, by the way. You should know you can clear the trees. If you just believe you can clear the trees, I wouldn't feel great about that. But they're climbing out and they're at the treetops, and the instinct that everyone has is to pull back because it's sort of like, well, I need to get further away from the ground, so I need to pull back. But in fact, the most important thing to do is to fly the best rate of climb. And so sometimes I'll hear instructors and examiners say that they'll actually put their hands on the front of the yoke so that they can't pull back anymore. So they actually like open palms pushing on the yoke. And so the only direction they're allowed to do is if they have a stall, the only direction they're allowed to do is to push forward on the yoke because they don't want to be pulling back any further. That would be what would aggravate the stall. So if they heard the stall horn, you have to push forward to level the nose to the rise, and you can't just pull back. And last but not least, secondary stall to aggressive pitch up on recovery. So we kind of demonstrated that briefly, but if you are recovering from your stall and then you try to pitch back up to start climbing right away again, don't give it enough time to actually gain some speed, then you can cause a secondary stall. Some completion standards: demonstrate power on, power off stalls to ACS standards, recover no lower than 1,500 AGL. Remember, we want to be flying these above 3,000 feet AGL. We just give ourselves a nice amount of buffer. Maintain a heading plus minus 10 degrees before stall or specified bank angle plus minus 10 degrees. Recognize stall recovery and promptly recover with proper procedure. For the logbook, this is part of the required training for your pre-solo. So talked about the flight various attitudes and power combinations with recovery initiated at first indication of stall and recovery from full stall. So we talked about both of those. No required homework today, but I would highly recommend chair flying, power on stalls, chair flying, power off stalls. These procedures, obviously you can pause the stream on these if you want to look through these and just kind of go slow motion through. You can also find versions of the 172 SP maneuvers all over the place. So if you prefer a different presentation, or if you find that it was confusing, definitely give it a look around. There's a lot of resources online for how to do these stalls or how to do these maneuvers in a 172. And of course, you can try flying them in the sim if you want to throw on the force vectors. I think they call them. Let me make sure I got the right name. Sim forces under the developer mode. You can kind of see what's actually happening in the stall. Nice way to play with some of those things and examine it a bit more. I think that's it. Any other questions before we close out today? Tomorrow we will be talking about normal and crosswind takeoffs and climbs. Looking forward to that. And one other thing to be aware of, on Thursday, I'm going in for an interview, actually. So for CFI interviews, there's kind of the standard interview on the ground, which is a little bit knowledge, but then there's also a usually multi-hour flying portion where they have you teach a lesson and do some other things. So I will be gone through most of the heart of the day on Thursday, most likely. I will say the weather in the Bay is incredibly variable, and it looks like I might not actually be going. So I may last minute do a lesson on Thursday. I may have it canceled. Currently it's listed as canceled, but we'll play a little bit by ear. All right. Thank you, Flying Turd. Appreciate the well wishes. Will an instructor expect you to maintain heading or give a timeline to correct to intended heading following a stall? Good question, Shoot. So an instructor would expect you to maintain heading through the stall. So, and you'd use those, let me flip back to here. So you'd use those visual indications in the distance. So, like we'd expect you to be pointing towards Crystal Springs. And remember, the criteria for success is plus or minus 10 degrees on the heading. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but it should be pretty straight. And a lot of that skill gets developed when you're practicing slow flight, because in slow flight, you also need to be able to hold a heading. When you actually enter the stall, if you're recovering at first indication of the stall and you're flying straight forward, it should be really doable to just recover straight in the same direction, hold your heading the whole time. And I think that would be like, really, you could nail that every time once you're getting your slow flight down. For recovering at full stall, you should be able to recover, again, holding that same heading because you're coordinated. And so because you're coordinated, then you would have equal lift. And so that means that your nose would just pitch down directly on the same heading you're on. And so again, you would expect then that your heading stays the same. An instructor would be, especially as you're first learning, forgiving of not being coordinated to some degree. I mean, there's a safety margin where it becomes important, but like if your ball's a little off center, you'll still get a little bit of a wing drop, and so you probably won't finish on exactly the right heading. As you're first learning, that's okay, but really the goal is to be developing that coordinated flight, which also means that your recovery should be on the same heading. If you're doing turning, then it's all about the bank angle. So then there's no expected heading you finish on. It's just you recover either at the first indication or full stall, and you're holding the correct bank angle, whatever was asked for. I think typically they ask for 15 degrees. Bank, that's my memory of most of what I've heard for the actual federal exams. But you're supposed to be able to do anything less than 20. So. Here's the lesson. Thanks, Flying Turd. Yep, shoots. Glad you liked it. Thanks for joining. Yeah, and if anyone has any questions afterwards, there's always the Discord for any follow-up, so I'll post that link again. And like I said, I'll start uploading things to YouTube later today, so hopefully I'll have this all up for tomorrow. All right, thanks everyone. Have a good rest of your day.